All right. Well, it's 6 on the dot, so we'll go ahead and get started. It's good to see everybody here tonight. Um, Glad we could spend this time together and sit down and continue our study. Lonnie, obviously not here. We got a junior old out here with us tonight, so we're going to lean on him for good comments and things. And he's already been filling in some during the last quarter and did a really good job. So look forward to some things that he'll bring up and say. And as I was preparing, I went back. I like to go back and listen to the recording from the last time we did it, which was 4 years ago. It was June of 2018, I believe. And so I flipped back, and lo and behold, it was me doing the class. I couldn't. I was like, I reckon they weren't here, and I was doing it. So I went ahead and listened anyway, and listened to the things that we talked about and we said, and it kind of made me smile a little bit. And I just thought I'd bring this up. But you go back through and you listen, and uh, Richard was on there. He was making comments, and Phil and Donna were on there, and they were making comments. And yeah, I kind of enjoyed listening to it. Just I kind of started listening close for stuff like that. You could hear Kelly sneezing 3, 4, 5 times in a row. I knew that was her. I could tell. But anyway, so I've prepared. Hopefully, I can do a good job. I know Austin will help me out, uh, and maybe we can have a good class here. So anyway, where we are, we're going through some history. We're early in the Bible, and who recorded? I don't know if I brought this up. Who recorded the portions of the Bible that we're in right now? Moses, the character that is coming into the story now, is the one who recorded the stuff that we're reading here. And this portion of the Bible early on is really important in us understanding the plan that God has in place for the people that He created. There is a plan, and there's a lot of details, and sometimes it just seems like you're reading a story and you hear some stuff, but later on, a lot of times we realize the details that were brought out were very important, and they were in there for a reason. And we've seen the Lord choose Abraham and his family to use here for a large period of time to play a vital role in bringing about this implementation of the plan that He has for us for people for the world. And we know early on that He made some promises to Abraham, that they would become a great nation, that they would inherit a land, and that a seed of his would bless through him all nations would be blessed. At this point, haven't seen any of them fully fulfilled yet, but which one are we kind of starting to see or partially have seen?
The nation.
The nation. Yeah, they've grown in number, right? You see different numbers on the estimate, 1 to 3 million or so, but they've grown in number. They're not an established nation yet. Nobody would argue that as far as that goes, but they are great in number, and that's something that would have been hard for Abraham to understand early on. But they are. They've grown, and we do see that portion in the process of being fulfilled. We've seen mention of the seed promise in Genesis 49 there, and through Judah. Um, when we were doing drill class, I just thought, which Bible period did we just finish, and which one are we entering now? Because we're changing. I guess that's an important point in our Bible class to realize we're changing Bible periods here. We we just ended the patriarchal period, and we're in Egyptian bondage now. That's where we are as far as what we teach our kids, how to divide the Bible up into sections. Leaving one section that we stayed in for quite a while, and now we're entering um, into the Egyptian bondage period. So on Wednesday night we covered chapter 1, and sort of a summary of that. We were listed, some names there of some that came, but the major idea that's going on in chapter 1 is that things have changed. And when they came into Egypt, they were welcome guests. They were given a good land. They were very blessed. Things were good. Jacob died. They went back and buried him. They came back voluntarily to Egypt to keep living there. And since then, though, it's not good. Things have changed. Um, it's turned into a slavery situation. And it's got to the point where Pharaoh, we mentioned, has become worried that they've grown so much that they may decide to rise up against Egypt, or maybe more, if anybody else did ever come against Egypt, if they were to side, they're already in the land there, and if they turned and sided with the enemy, that would be really bad for Egypt. So that's his worry at this time. And we talked about how he went about attempting to deal with that from the things that he did, and he kind of had three levels. What was the first thing that he attempted? His first attempt to control the population of.
Put taskmasters over the children to give them a list of things to do to occupy their time while they're in slavery or bondage.
Yes, and apparently they weren't just free to leave at this point, but it got way worse. Whatever they were doing got way worse. And it said that they built two whole cities during this time. And I don't know, time here, is hard to follow, because you'll, in just a verse or two there, I don't know how much time passed where he tried that. He tried making it really hard on them. And during that period, they built Ramses and Pithom, two whole storage cities, just extra cities that were built. But obviously that didn't do what he intended for it to do. And he went a step farther. What was his second proposal to control the population?
To have the midwives kill the baby boy.
He went to the midwives and mentioned a couple of them by name, and commanded them to kill male Israelite babies. But remember how that portion of the story went. They feared God, and it was Hebrew midwives, by the way, that he went to, and they didn't do that. That I don't know how long he tried that. We don't really know, but that did not work either. So he's at his third, where we are in our story now. He's stepped it up to the most extreme way that he can imagine to do this. And what was it? Yeah, it's a law. Male Israelite boys get thrown into the river. We're just it's not a secret anymore. We'll kill it. And we talked about, how bad this would be. Any of those would have been really bad, but it's gotten to the point now where it's just miserable to exist there. And just the depression that you would have if you were an Israelite, to be there in that situation. And Lonnie did make a note. I think it's good. Just remember, not too far in the future here, when Israel references back to their time in Egypt, and how they talk about their time in Egypt. But anyway, they don't have a choice. But you wouldn't have a hard time believing that they would be happy to get out of there at this point. Maybe not so much in the past. Things were good in the past, and maybe it wasn't on anybody's mind that we need to leave. We need to go back to where our ancestors came from. But at this point, not that they see a way out, but they would be happy to leave if they had the opportunity. So we did begin chapter 2. Do you have anything up to that point before we start into chapter 2, reviewing the beginning?
No.
Okay. Well, we began chapter 2, and we went 9 or 10 verses in. But Austin and I couldn't remember if we actually covered verse 10. But we began chapter 2, and we're introduced to two Levites. We know from other places that their names are Amram and Jochebed. And their situation is they have two children and they're pregnant with a third. And this decree from Pharaoh, this law has been made to kill male children. And they have a male child. So this obviously is super stressful for them. And we talked about how they chose, obviously, not to follow out with Pharaoh's decree. They kept him and they hid him. How long did they hide him for?
3 months.
3 months old. So after 3 months, you imagine the stress and the playing it through in their head of what to do. And I don't know what the penalty was for being found that you weren't doing this. Maybe it was you put to death. Who knows? Their whole family could have been in danger for having this child there. But they hit him. But then she came with an idea and took a chance. And she put him in a basket there that would float. She made it where it would float. And she put it in the river there. And we talked about how it was put in a place where Pharaoh's daughter came down and found it. And we talked about how she's had compassion for the child. It was obvious. It wasn't, oh no, here's a lost baby. We need to try to find its parents. It made everybody, it was obvious what had happened here. She knew it was a Hebrew baby that someone had put there. And did she go through with Pharaoh's law? No, she could have just went through with what her father had said and dumped him out in the river there. But she did. She got compassion on him. And this is where we're at in our story. Miriam, the sister, Moses is going to be his name. He doesn't have a name yet in the story. But Moses' sister, Miriam, was nearby. She was told to stay and to watch. And at a point in this, she comes up to Pharaoh's daughter and asks her if she would like her to go find the Hebrew woman to nurse the baby, to take care of the baby. And she said yes. And she went and got Jochebed, Moses' mother. And she's told there to take the child away, nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So she did that. Now, we don't know how long. We can speculate, but we don't really know how long. Moses' mother got to take care of him and raise him. And teach him up to a certain point. That was one question I kind of had is I have age with a question mark written down here. We don't know how long he, stayed there with her. Some things make me think it was longer than just old enough to be weaned and still survive, that it was maybe a little bit longer than that. But in verse 10, it says the child grew, and at a point in this, she, his mother, brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. So Moses has entered the picture. Moses is obviously a very important character in God's plan. And we have a setting here for a lot of things that are going to happen. So I have a couple more comments, but at this point, does anybody have anything that you'd like to say or bring up?
One thing that I've heard in past preachers that's actually taught about Moses is they kind of compare, because Moses was put in a reed ark type boat and put in the water, and that he later on saved the people through God, that it's kind of like a foresight of Noah being in an ark and saving the world, that God uses men to accomplish things that most people think that it's impossible to do. And by all of this that happened to Moses, him being actually kept by his real mother, she had more time to teach him more about the Hebrew and her, where he came from, before the daughter of the Pharaoh actually got a hold of him. And he was still communicating with his mother, But I think God used that to actually hold the teachings of the Jewish people in his life than him just to be totally indoctrinated as an Egyptian.
We're definitely going to see that in today's story. He knows his Hebrew. He relates. He knows who his brothers and sisters are. Brother and sister is. We're going to know that later. So whatever line of communication was still allowed to be there. There was some. Yes.
You know, another thing I think about with this in verse 10 is you have Pharaoh's daughter, and it says he became her son, and then who names him?
She did.
She does, right? Which I think is interesting, right? That
What did they call him before? I didn't think about
right, yeah, that Pharaoh's daughter is the one that named him, and so she's obviously taken ownership of him. So she views him as her own child. I mean, it says that, but like you can see that even in the fact that she names him, and so he's going to be taken care of. And so that's something, you know, that would hopefully be comforting to his actual mother. And
Yeah, she followed through with her deal she made with her back when she found him in the river. You know, how many years did she stay in contact with Jochebed while she was nursing him and raising him? Or did she just say when he's 5, bring him to me? Or I don't know. You know, when he's 10, bring him to me. I don't know how that worked, but she follows through. She obviously wants him.
Mhm.
So Moses now is with Pharaoh's daughter in Pharaoh's household. Um, and a couple things that I'll make a point of before we get into verse 11, because this is another one of those points where between 10 and 11, a lot of time passes. 40 years minus however old he is when he goes to live there. A couple things. In Acts 7, Stephen tells us that Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and works. And it says he was in Egypt. We know Egypt was known for its learning and wisdom and its school systems that it had there, and so we know that he grew up with the best as far as education goes and opportunities go, and learning and teaching. Um, there was a note in Bob's book that kings would send their sons to Egypt to from far away to receive training and education. So Moses is given those opportunities that a Hebrew normally would never have received. And another interesting thing, and it's not from the scripture, so we obviously don't know for sure if it was, but Josephus, who is a historian from that time, records that Moses would have a specific point that he served as a general. He led an army against the Ethiopians. So a lot of stuff happens in 40 years until we get to verse 11, where we pick back up with the story. Then we don't have much. We don't have anything recorded here for us. But you kind of see he's grown. He's grown up. He's 40-year-old. We're going to know, and we enter in. We kind of skip his whole childhood, and now he's a middle-aged man when we pick up in verse 11. Okay, well let's look. We'll begin here with our new material in verse 11. And it says, "Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown," and I'll pause there for just a second, that we're in Acts 7 is where, and 23, it's where it tells us he was 40 at this point. Just for a side note, I have a note in my Bible made of that. That he went out to his brethren, and he looked at their burdens. So it mentions his brethren. Who is that? The Hebrews, his brethren. He views them as his brethren. That's his people. And he knew that. He knew who his real parents were. And I don't know. I've always wondered, did he look different than the Egyptians? Would everybody else have realized that he was a Hebrew and not an Egyptian? I'm not sure, but we know that he knows who his brethren are. But continuing there, it says, "And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand." So we kind of see that he has a he's having a problem with the way that his brethren are being treated. And nothing really happens yet, but he's going out at least surveying the situation, right? He's surveying the situation to see what's going on. He's going out amongst the land where the Hebrews are. And do you think it was an uncommon thing for an Egyptian to beat a Hebrew probably at this time? I would doubt it, right? I would doubt it, but that's happening there, and he kills the Egyptian, buries him there. Even though Moses is Pharaoh's grandson, how do you think Pharaoh? We're going to see in a minute, but how do you think he's going to think about Hebrews killing Egyptians, Egyptians that work for him? Obviously, yeah. That
Pharaoh would have problem with anybody, even if he was a full Egyptian killing an Egyptian, especially after a taskmaster that's actually in charge of the slaves, the Hebrews, and one killed the other. I mean, he ain't gonna put up with it because it spread like wildfire through the whole Egyptians group. I mean, that's the same thing that would happen today. And I think that Moses, by him actually being trained as an Egyptian, not only was he trained in knowledge, but he was trained in warfare to kill somebody real quick like. So I figured that when he actually confronted this Egyptian, it didn't take him no time and he was a dead man. And then he buried him because he didn't want to be caught of what he'd done.
Yeah, obviously by hiding him there, he didn't order that he be killed. He killed him and he hid him, showing that he knew that there would be consequences if it was known what he had done. A couple things here that I'll point out before we move on, and I know that's my style. I don't know. I like I stop in the middle of verses, I cover a verse or two, and I talk. That's just the way I like to do it. But Moses seems very bold right here, right? We're going to see a different Moses later on in today's story. But here he seems very bold, and he seems very concerned, and he feels for his brethren. I don't know that he's not going to be concerned for his brethren later on, but his life's going to change, and that's not going to be on the forefront of his mind maybe as much anymore. And he's not going to be very bold later on. But here it seems like he is. Why didn't God go ahead and use him right now? Here he is, ready to do something. Why didn't God take him and use him right here at this point? Why did God let the things that are fixing to happen in the story happen before he came to him and decided to use him to carry out the role that he wants him to carry out? Those are things to think about there.
Lucas in Hebrews 11:27 says, "You fear God more than you fear Pharaoh."
Yes. Thank you. Good point. Okay, so we're to verse 13, and it says, "And when he went out the second day," so he goes back out the next day, "behold, two Hebrew men were fighting, and he said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? Then he said," the man that he was talking to, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" So Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." So at that point he realized this is not good. This is a problem. And it was, because in verse 15 it says, "When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian." And we'll end right there for a second. So it is known. I don't know if it said nobody saw him. You didn't think anybody saw him. Maybe they found the body, but how would they have known? But maybe the Hebrew went out and told somebody, and word got out that way in just a day there. But apparently it's known. And Pharaoh knows. It's made it all the way back to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is out to kill him. So he has no choice but to leave immediately and get out of there. And it says that he goes over to Midian. So his life just changed drastically on the drop of a hat right there. He just flees. He's got to go and he's got to go and hide. So, any comments or anything up to this point in our story?
So I was thinking about some things with that. So when Moses does this, right, when he kills the Egyptian, we mentioned he didn't want anybody to know, or he was looking around, didn't want anyone to know. And you mentioned he was bold, and he was. And it seems like he's trying to take the role almost of a savior of the people. But what type of savior does it seem like he wants to be? Does he want to be a public savior? No. I mean, that's why he doesn't want people to know about this. So it seems like he is being bold, but he's not being bold in the sense of wanting to be a leader. And that's something to remember, right? Because that will play a part if we get to it today with how he reacts to some things. Also, it's probably worth remembering that, and we mentioned this, but Pharaoh is seeking to kill him, right? And that's why he's leaving. He's not leaving because he's ashamed. He's not leaving for any other, like he's afraid he's going to be killed, right? That's probably worth remembering because later on when he's given the opportunity to come back, that may play a part in what his thinking is when he's thinking about coming back, right? Because he knows that Pharaoh is wanting to kill him for what he did. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that.
Anybody else got anything? Okay, well, at the end of that verse, which was 15, he goes to Midian and he sits down by a well. So, in the area, the wilderness there, where it looks like he would have fled to, a well would have been an important place. Not a lot of water, just everywhere there. But he's at this well, and in verse 16 it says, the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. So a man there had some daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. So we're introduced to a family who lives here in this area, and the daughters of this man take care of the flocks, and they use this well. In verse 17 it says, then the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. So apparently there was this ritual here for these other shepherds to allow these daughters to draw out water from a well. And once they got it drawn out, run them off and let their flocks drink the water, and then they would have to draw out more water. And Moses is just there observing this, kind of hanging out in that area, and he stands up for them, and doesn't allow it to happen this day. And it also says that he helped them in that, and he helped them water their flock. And that, watering a flock, I don't know what they dipped down in the well, but I don't know how big their flock was. But that would have been not a 5-minute job there that he helped them with. So anyway, he stands up, doesn't even know who they are, but stands up, helps them in this situation. So in this way, he's introduced to this family. In 18, it says, when they came to Ruel, or his name's going to be Jethro, another name for him, Jethro, here later in the story, their father, he said, how is it that you have come so soon today? So obviously, they're back sooner than usual, because this seems to be a regular occurrence that they have to stay gone twice as long because of this. He asked them, why are you back? In 19, then they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds. So today this guy was there, and he didn't let the shepherds steal all of the water that we drew out. This Egyptian helped us out. And it says, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock. So Ruel, or Jethro here, said to his daughters, and where is he? So he's almost like, so you just left him there? Why didn't you bring him home? Why didn't you offer him a place to stay here? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread. So we're introduced to Jethro here, the family. They are told to go and get him. Obviously, he has made a positive impression on them from the first time that they met here. They're very appreciative, and they bring him to their home there. And in verse 21, I don't know how much time passed here, but at a point, it says, then Moses was content to live with the man. And he, Jethro, gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. So I doubt it happened that very day that all those decisions were made. But Moses stays with him. He don't have anywhere else to stay, right? I mean, he has nowhere, nothing. So he leaves and he finds a family that invites him to their home, and he stays there with them. He's made a positive impression. He ends up deciding, don't have anything better to do. I'll just stay here with them. He ends up taking one of this man's daughters as a wife. So this is kind of a big deal in Moses' life as well. Any comments or anything? Points?
Was there any commentary about why they knew he was an Egyptian? Maybe his clothing or?
So I was thinking it could be his clothing. They may have said, "Who are you?" He's like, "I'm an Egyptian." You know, I mean, I don't know.
I figure it when he played and the way he was dressed while he was in Pharaoh's court and he was like 40 years old. I mean, everybody from all the countries around, if they seen an Egyptian, just the way they held themselves and what attire that they had on, they'd know that there was an Egyptian, even though he was a Hebrew. And him growing up with the Egyptians, and it ain't no telling what he may have told the shepherds while he was fighting them off their sheep and everything, that, he may even spoke to them in Egyptian language.
Right.
Which would make, the daughters say, he's an Egyptian man.
I wondered the same thing when he was 3 months old. When they saw him as a baby, they said, "This is a Hebrew." But how did they?
Circumcision.
Maybe circumcision. Maybe
Yeah.
also
That's right.
because who else? I imagine that kind of stuff might have happened. I don't know. People abandoning babies.
You wouldn't have hid an Egyptian.
Yeah, I mean,
You're right.
it would have
That's true too.
That would
Well, I mean, I was wondering
Think about
the
that.
same thing. Moses knew he was a Hebrew, so. even
Well-
though he was raised as an Egyptian, if the daughter said, "Well, who are you?"
I thought. Well,
Same thing, 10 Commandments, yeah.
so
he didn't want anybody to know who he was. I don't know how fast word spreads.
yeah,
But,
if he said he was a Hebrew,
Yeah, if I'm Moses, Pharaoh's son, he knows. So he's kind of in hiding in some ways.
but even if they didn't know, like he was specifically Moses, and Pharaoh was looking for him in particular, it's like, oh, a Hebrew's here. The Egyptians may be looking for an escaped Hebrew, and so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
easier to say I'm an Egyptian, probably.
So imagine if he was raised as an Egyptian, carries himself different, plus the children of Israel were treated like slaves, so they're kind of beat down. So you could probably tell the difference in the two people.
Too, with him going to school and being well versed, his language is also going to play a big part in that too. And it's interesting to me that Pharaoh wanted to kill all of the Egyptian boys, but yet
The Hebrew boys.
Hebrew boys,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. And he welcomed them, Moses, into his household, but now he wants to kill them. And maybe
He allowed it. I don't know how much he welcomed, but he allowed.
Yeah.
He allowed it to happen.
Well, it was probably that Pharaoh's daughter
Yeah, she got what she wanted. Didn't she?
actually had enough influence on Pharaoh when she said, "This is my son." He didn't question her, and by her probably having him schooled some before she actually probably presented him to the Pharaoh, he went along that he was his son, that he was an Egyptian instead of a Hebrew.
If anybody was going to get by with not obeying Pharaoh's law, I guess his daughter might be one that was allowed to. Dad, you have something? Well, you was going to say something.
No, I'm just saying that's why I'm not saying a whole lot. I said that and made myself look like an idiot.
No. Okay. Well,
It seems like at this time he does seem to have a soft spot for the oppressed. Whether
Yeah.
it's,
Mhm.
Hebrew
standing up for what's right or whatever. That seems his nature, doesn't it?
Is that, did that play a role in why God chose him? I don't know, like Austin said, obviously, he didn't want to take the leadership role, but maybe, he would have been more of a supportive role. But he seems to have a soft spot for the oppressed.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
He's not the type of person that I imagine they were shocked to wander up in the desert, homeless at a well, there that they meet on that occasion. But anyway,
But also his mother raised him, so she probably taught him.
yeah,
That, it wasn't about the Egyptian law, it wasn't about the Hebrew, what was going on with them. And like I said, the red boy Joe in Hebrews 11:27 says by faith, he was Egypt. So I mean, his mother raised him, so.
yeah, she definitely had an influence.
Do we know how far Midian is from Egypt? Like travel wise or knowledge or?
Well,
I don't.
yeah,
I don't know where specifically
True
this part
median.
is.
In Bob's book, I've read a lot. True median. It seems like they're real close to Mount Sinai, just a little on the other side of Mount Sinai, and it's probably not truly like median where you would look at it, point on the map, but it was outer area of that, and this
It's a region,
median.
right?
We're living in that region, so it's referred to as median because it would seem we're going to see that he's at Mount Horeb real soon, and it would seem if it was true median on the map, odd that he would 100 150 miles travel with his flock to Mount Horeb. So it's probably somewhere between Mount Horeb and on the other side anyway, the east side of Mount Sinai. Maybe is that I don't know. We don't know for sure. I don't believe,
No.
but
Sounds
anyway.
good to me.
Yeah, I did read something about that, but now repeating it back to you is not as easy. Okay, so I believe we're at verse 23. No, 22, right? He marries in 21, and in 22 they have a son. She bore him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. So he's got a family here now. He's got a wife and he's got a son. But in verse 23, we have a change in the story there. It says, now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So this is almost like, you're watching a show and this is going on, and you pause and you go back to something that was happening earlier in the show, and it kind of updates you on what's going on back over here. And back over here, King of Egypt dies. The children of Israel are groaning, and they are crying out. And it says in verse 24, so God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. So God remembered them is the way it's translated. That's a little, I don't believe remember as he forgot. It looks as if God is ready to carry on with his plan that he has for them. Do you think they still remembered the promise? Believe that the promises of Abraham would ever happen? How easy would it have been they've been told that their whole life, or their ancestors, I guess, have been told that their whole life, and it seemed like something to be excited for your nation. But at this point, I don't know that I don't know if that's something they even anticipate happening.
With them crying, I believe it's more than they use the word crying out here. They was probably praying to God on a regular basis because, with all the people there over all the time that they were taught since they were real small, even up into their bondage, that if they needed anything, that they were to pray to God. So there was probably a lot of prayers going to God about, we was told of promises that you give to Abraham, and here we are in bondage, we're being beaten, and we're going through all this problems, and I figured between as big of a nation they was, and all the religious leaders and the heads of the tribes praying to God, this actually, he heard their cries through their prayers, not that just them screaming, you know,
Yeah.
I'm suffering. I think they were praying long and hard enough that he actually heard what they were asking that they needed help from.
Yeah, I think it could be both. I think he may have heard their prayer, like they had maybe more formal prayers. But I think there are also times where they probably cried out in agony. He heard that too. You brought up something I thought was kind of interesting. So you said, do the people, this may not be exactly what you said, but do the people expect this, that the promises to still happen, right? And that's kind of interesting. I've not thought about that, but that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, because probably at this point, I would guess the promises are not exactly what's on their mind right now. Right now, probably what's on their mind is just, we got to get out of here, right? Not necessarily, oh, well, God promised us a land and that we're, it's going to be great. That's probably not what we want. They're just thinking, we just got to get out of here. And, but God does remember, right? And that's the thing, is that God does remember his promise. And I mean, that's the most important person to remember, right? Is God remembers. I felt like there was something else I want to say on that. Oh, so you said, it mentions God remembers. You said God didn't forget. Why? This is for anybody. Why do we think God waited this long?
Because people were told that they would be in the land for 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so now the 400 years are almost up. So it's time to put this plan into motion.
Yes. So speaking of promises, right? Like God said this is going to happen. I think maybe another thing, it doesn't say this, at least in this place, and I don't know if it says it in another place, but we see that God waits other times. And it doesn't mean that something isn't necessary. Well, maybe I shouldn't say necessary. Something couldn't happen at a certain time. But he decides to wait until the time is complete, right? Can you think of another instance where that happens? Okay, yes, that's not what I was thinking, but that's true. What about the people in the land of Canaan? Could he have given that land to Abraham if he wanted to? Why did he not?
Because their sins not
It was given.
Their iniquity was not complete, right? However you want to say it, but yeah. So like basically the time was not complete, right? And that may be the case here too. Maybe God is waiting for the Israelites to say, okay, we really need something. We need someone to come save us. And they're at their most desperate hour. That may be something that's a part of this as well, to be looking so hard for something and someone to save them.
I think that's a good point.
And God does that today with us. I mean, the New Testament says he's patiently waiting so that all will come to know him and that none will perish, but he gives us free will.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, the children of Israel, he's not going to let them have chariots, and they beat somebody, they're not allowed to capture all their weapons.
Right.
He keeps it to where they're going to know that it's him.
They have to rely on
him. They
him.
need him, and they have to rely on him,
Mhm.
and it's him that is the one that's doing the things that are the good things that they're going to have. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, are we about to wrap up?
I am. I'm not going to start chapter 3. I had
Okay.
one more little question I was going
So,
to ask, but
do you mind if I say one thing?
No, go
And then
ahead.
you can ask your question.
got 2 minutes.
Or if you want to ask, if your question is going to be a 2-minute question, you can do that.
It's not.
All right. So the only thing I meant to mention this, and I said, well, that's all I have to say about that. And that wasn't true. Was back in verse 14. No, wait. Yes, verse 14. The question is asked, who made you a prince and judge over us? Right? Well, that's kind of interesting because at that point, what is Moses? A prince. And then later, what is he going to be? A judge, right? And who put him in those positions? God, right? So that's actually a good question, right? Who made you a prince and judge over us? Like, that's the right question. And that's going to come up later. In fact, Moses is going to say, well, why should they believe me? And God's going to say, because of me. And so that's actually a really good question.
What do you think Moses, at this point in his life, thinks about his future? Seems like he may be content with,
Mhm.
you know, never would have thought I would have ended up here, but here I am. He finds a good family there, marries, has kids. First verse of chapter 3, he's tending the sheep there. Seems like he just went and started over, established a new life, and
Mhm.
I guess he's happy. I don't want to say that, but he's got something else going on. You know, he's finally settled. You know, things have got chaotic for a minute, but he's settled in somewhere now,
Mhm.
and so he's not gonna probably anticipate what's coming in chapter 3 either.
I would say that he is in a position that he ain't thinking about going back to Egypt.
Yeah, I think that's probably the farthest thing from his mind. But anyway,
Yeah.
okay, well, that's our time. So we ended there at the end of chapter 2. We didn't even, I thought we would get into 3 some, but we didn't. That's good. We had lots of good comments. So we're actually right on track with our curriculum at the moment. We can say that. We may not be able to say that very often this quarter, but we're right on track for where we'll start Wednesday night. So anyway, thank you for all the good comments.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.